that. I don't
Yeah,
want
whatever works.
All right, here we go. Record. And wow, there he is. I've just told you all about him. Such an impressive guy. We were really honored to have you joining us here. You've been on all the biggest shows. You're a big deal. Thank you for slumming it in the shed here, Jerry.
Well, I'm a mocker, so I've got.
Like,
but so are you, Pete. So that's okay.
Yes, right. We both are. What does that mean? Is that Yiddish? Is that Inca?
That's Yiddish. I mean, dude, I'm from Brooklyn. It's my second tongue. It means I'm a big deal. I'm a big guy. No, I'm teasing. That's all.
Well, let me
That's
start
what it
there.
does mean.
I want to talk obviously about the new book. I want to talk a little bit about the first book, but I talk a lot about and with men and dealing with our issues. It's not gender specific, but when did Jerry Colonna kind of start doing the inner work? I know a lot about your life and the different crucible moments that you've talked about and written about, but when would you describe that you started working on yourself with any modality, from therapy to meditation, or just even beginning to open your mind that you wanted to?
Well, there were two seminal moments. There was one in my late teens where, okay, now we're going to bring the energy down. I had just started college at Queens College, City University of New York, and I tried to kill myself. And the depression began, well, when did it begin? It began at birth. Yeah. I mean, it was always a complicated relationship with the inner landscape. But it was really then that I began doing some serious therapy. I took a break during my 20s. I tried to sort of push myself into adulthood, as we often do. And then in my late 30s, after a successful career as an investor, the depression came back with a vengeance. And I was once again suicidal. And that's when I was in therapy with a brilliant psychoanalyst, whom I write about a lot in my first book. And that was when I really said, I can't fuck around anymore. This is like serious. Like the whole house of cards that I had constructed to survive my childhood and sort of wrangle my way into adulthood fell apart.
Were you a father by that point?
I was. I had 3 kids. I mean, I still have 3 kids, but yeah, I was 38 years old and I'm 60 today.
And to give some background on that, you then, I mean, it sounds like you've looked into, been curious about pretty much everything. You've got a tattoo of a spider from experience you had in the jungle. There it is. Oh, wow. I've heard you describe it, but I never saw it. Jerry just pulled the shirt down and I got to see his tattoo, which is very important to him.
But we didn't violate any FCC regulations.
Well, I'm slightly aroused, but that's neither here nor there. The other thing is, I mean, you've gone in the desert and just had just water for days. You've gone on retreats, meditations. You've take me through kind of what you've done to get to become the thinker and now the teacher of what you've learned from all this inner wisdom, inner work.
You know, it's interesting. I don't think I've ever looked at it through the lens that you just presented it. But yeah, I've kind of been in a lot of different places. And I mean, I crossed the polar ice cap in Iceland. I have built schools in Tibet. I have gone on an endless stream of retreats, whether they're meditation or otherwise. But it was really only when I learned to sit still and confront myself. I think it was Blaise Pascal who said that all of man's, and it's a very gendered statement, but all of man's problems stem from our inability to sit still in a room. Something like that. And it was really only when I began to sit still in a room and just deal with the demons that live inside my head that I really began to make progress.
Isn't that scary?
Fuck yeah.
Like
it's the scariest thing we can, the scariest thing. But, you know, again, I'll mangle another quote from Joseph Campbell. The treasure you seek is in the back of the cave. And as I like to add, way in the back, the really scary dark spot in the back of the cave. But that's where the treasure is.
Do you think, as reading, you know, trying to connect your first book to your second book, I wanted to simplify it by asking you a somewhat binary question, which is, can you help other people achieve, and we'll get into the specifics of reunion, belonging, and understanding how they can make the world a better place for other people that might not be them? Can you do that work if you haven't done the work on yourself? Can you help other people if you haven't really figured out yourself? The whole put your mask on first. Can you be a teacher of things, an advocate for things, if you hate yourself, if you're really struggling all the time?
No.
I didn't think so. But
But let me be more specific and a little bit more clear. I think you don't have to have completed that work to begin to help people. In fact, I don't think we ever complete that work.
No, right.
But you have to have the bravery to confront those parts of you that, as I write in Reunion, that you've dismembered, the parts of you that you've thrown in the back of the long black bag that you drag behind you, in order to have a foundation where the work that you do is not just performative.
Right.
And even more, those of us who hold power, either by dint of our body, how we love, who we love, or by dint of our economic status or our privilege, those of us who hold power who don't do that inner work are more likely than not to make the situation worse. So not only can you not help it, you make the situation worse.
It also seems, and you can speak to this, that when you are stuck, or as I wrote, because I feel like depression, the word just means so many different things to different people: worry, anxiety, fear. But I called, when I lost my job, when I was in the worst situation I'd been in as an adult. Well, first of all, I hadn't established a lot of resilience because I had such a great life, Jerry. But when I got there, I called it being in the suck. And I realized while I was in the suck for my life, someone told me, Tom Shadyac, the great director who was a friend and mentor, told me, you got to let people help you. You understand how much it feels good to help people. That's kind of one of the pivot moments in your life when you gave someone a very important book. I believe the book you gave him, the author now wrote the foreword for your new book, if I have that right. But I mean, like, you realized helping someone was the most important thing you could do and kind of change your life and career. So you can do that even if you're still broken, I guess, right?
Yeah. And there's two things that I want to say in response to that. The first is I caught the self-negating statement that you made about your own sort of lack of suffering, call it, as a kid.
Yeah, challenge me on that if you want. I held pretty strong to it.
I'm not saying it was right or wrong. I'm just saying let it go, dude. Meaning it doesn't undermine it. I could be wrong. It's like my ears are so tuned.
Well, let me explain. I think I did let it go, and the therapist told me I was off the bench. My struggle was being on the bench in sports. That was my big trauma, and I never got off the bench. But my career, I did. I interviewed John Lewis, and my therapist said, you're off the bench. But what I mean is, when I lost my job, life was so good. When I lost my job, I had never suffered that way. So I didn't have the resilience and all the tools that I needed that so many other people had. And I find this to be true of a lot of guys like me. All of a sudden, they have the kind of struggle, marriage, divorce, rather, financial, losing job, ego, purpose, kids leave for college, your purpose. And we don't know what to do, Jerry. That's where I was. And to some extent, I'm still there. I have a great practice now, but I find myself there because I don't have the resilience.
So the dangerous thought pattern that can show up from that place is, because I did not suffer before, I am broken.
Yes. Or not resilient enough.
Or not resilient. Exactly. And it's like, okay, blow a kiss to that thought, man. Go easy on yourself. It's okay. The truth is, you're suffering now. And that's it. And your opportunity to develop resilience begins now. and that's okay. So we just put that to rest. As your therapist said, you're off the bench now. Okay. All right. If you want, I'll jump back to the other part of the question, the Parker part of the question. What you're referring to is a time in which a young man came into an office. This is actually before I was a coach, but it helped me define myself. He was lost, completely lost. He's 28 years old, and he was networking with the ex-VC, the ex-venture capitalist, trying to find his way into the startup community. He was a lawyer. And I said to him something like, look, you look miserable. Why did you become a lawyer in the first place? And he started to cry and tell me all about trying to please his father. And that's when I realized that I had a gift. And the gift was to ask the right question, to hear something in particular.
Mm.
And that's when I reached over to a shelf and I pulled down a copy of Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer, which was a book that had transformed my life. And I gave it to him and I said, read this and write back to me. And after that, that's when I decided to become a coach. The coda on that story is Parker has become one of my closest friends. He refers to me as his big brother, even though he's in his mid-80s. And he is a mentor, a teacher. He held my hand in writing Reunion. And yeah, he wrote the foreword to the book.
Really, really great and important story. And I discovered his work through you, and I've discovered a lot through you and reading and learning about you, and certainly listening to you in conversation with Dan Harris and great interviews with Tim Ferriss.
Mm.
And I really want to try to get into Reunion, but I think we have to start with just the fact that with where you were at in kind of 2020, with what you were doing, you were helping people, you'd help so many individuals working on their lives. But there was this moment that we all went through, and we all had our own specific experiences in it and during it. But because of your tight relationship with your daughter, and you guys were talking while she was at a protest for George Floyd, and something happened there. And there is this moment, as you describe it, that is so profound and powerful. The phrase that she used, it made me want to shake her hand. Tell me about that.
So, if we recall those times, it was the pandemic had just begun. George Floyd was murdered, I believe, on May 28th, or Memorial Day, if I remember correctly. And I was terrified. As a lot of us were. I mean, I thought the pandemic was going to cause us to have a slowdown for a couple of weeks, right? And I live on a farm outside of Boulder, Colorado. My wife and I have horses. I was safe, even though I didn't feel safe. And after the murder, when the protests started going around the world, my daughter Emma, who is now 31, and her brothers Sam and Michael were protesting. But Emma has always been out there. I remember after Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, Missouri,
Yeah.
she Emma's career is in education. She began as a teacher. She now helps run a charter school in Nashville, Tennessee, from New York City. And she has always been dedicated. She's fierce. She's always been dedicated to social justice. And the way she focuses that energy is in education. And I remember sitting with her in my living room in Colorado, and she was crying about the death of Michael Brown. She said, "What is the point, Dad, of me helping these kindergartners if a young Black man is just going to be murdered in the streets? What is the point?" And what I did was I actually brought up a video of Parker talking about something called I'm blanking on the name, standing in the gap, the tragic gap. That's it.
Mm.
And he talks about the fact that there are two postures between what he calls irrelevant idealism and corrosive cynicism. And that we're called to stand in the gap between those two places, which translates into the fact that we have to try knowing full well that we're likely going to fail. And that we can't give over to corrosive cynicism and say, oh, what the fuck? So I told her that that's what we have to do in response. And that came back to me one night when she was part of a crowd of about 5,000 people trapped on the Manhattan Bridge, connecting Brooklyn to Manhattan, on their way to protest at the headquarters of the New York City Police Department. And she starts texting me about the fact that the police were starting to pepper spray people. Now, unfortunately or unfortunately, I've had experience being pepper sprayed in protests. So I began giving her advice.
Yeah.
But the most important thing was I realized she was in effect pushing my words back at me. And in effect saying, you know, I spend my career suggesting that those who hold power, that in order for them to be better leaders, they have to become better humans. And the problem with that structure, as true as it is, it stops when it stops at the meat bag of me.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be a better human, but I'm not going to dedicate myself to lifting up other humans around me.
Especially if there's skin in the game.
Especially if there's skin in the game. That's right. And so her words came back to me, words that she had said to me repeatedly, which was, Dad, it's not enough to be an ally. You have to be a co-conspirator.
Yeah. That right there, that phrase.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought this, but I wonder if when you were holding baby Emma when she was just born, if someone were to tell you someday your daughter is going to text you from the Brooklyn Bridge where she's protesting against anti-racism, and she's going to text you and she's going to be in the middle of being pepper sprayed, what you would have thought of what kind of a job you did as a parent, because it sounds like there's only one way a kid really ends up like that. Not one way, many ways. But I mean, you must be pretty proud of all of your kids for being involved and trying to be the change that they want to see.
Yeah, and both their mom and I have always been committed, but
yeah,
to social justice, but and we tried to model that.
But
even while we demonstrate, even while we enjoyed the successes of life that life has to offer.
Right. And back to that quote, you've got to be a co-conspirator. You're familiar with, and I think right about, James Baldwin and many other writers and civil rights leaders that have said that same thing in so many different ways. It's different when your daughter says it that way, but I mean, they'd always said that. You've got to actually do something. I mean, Dr. King warned, I think it was a letter from the Birmingham jail where I'm paraphrasing. He's like, the problem isn't the Klan, the conservative whites. The problem is the complacent liberals, the moderates, if you will. I forget what he said. That's our problem. And here I am living in the suburbs. And then I went out and advocated and did everything I could and have throughout my career. And it usually was great. And then all of a sudden, I'm in trouble, as I told you before I hit record. They called in a false complaint on me because I went out and was that advocate. So in a way, my point is saying you can be the co-conspirator, but there's skin in the game. You might lose. You might lose something really important to you. What do you think about that? How do you deal with that?
Look, one of my most famous questions, right? A coach is defined by the questions they ask their clients. A therapist, what are the questions that the therapist asks you to prompt you to move forward, to prompt you to grow up? And one of my most famous questions is, how have I been complicit in creating the conditions in my life that I say I don't want? complicit, not responsible. How have I helped it along? How have I been an accomplice? Okay. When I started working on this book, when I was challenged by my daughter to live up to my own words, that question morphed into how have I been complicit in and benefited from the conditions in the world I say I don't want to see? Now, that's a core question of privilege. How have I benefited from this, from systemic oppression?
Indeed.
But there's a corollary question here, Pete, which I think you get to, which is, and what am I willing to give up that I love in order to see the world that I know needs to happen? My safety, my status, my power, my economic privilege. What am I really willing to give up? Because the problem, you're right, quoting those elders, the problem is people who look like me
Yes.
not speaking up.
Yes. Specifically, really very much like you, like
white,
glasses,
cisgender, straight, male,
and me
with
too.
economic power.
Yeah.
And you,
Yeah.
right? With the ability to actually withstand. It sucked that they gave a version of swatting you.
Yeah.
Okay, it sucks. But dude, you're not in jail.
And more importantly, to help you make maybe the point that I haven't made yet, I'd do it again. I have done it again. I will continue to do it. They didn't silence me. My whole brand has always been stand up against apathy for the climate, for the planet, for marginalized people and communities. It sucked. It was horrible. It gave my daughter one of her defining moments. It gave my family a defining moment. And it gave me a sense of purpose that I might have never had, to put so much skin in the game right in my community. And it gets me out of bed every morning. I'm not angry. I just want to make a difference and have a purpose. Maybe I'm a little angry.
And imagine you identify as white. And if you were not white, what would have happened?
Oh, I mean, I've screamed at so many police officers in my life.
Right.
So I know
and you're alive.
Yeah. I got choked once, but that's because I hit the guy's horse. I mean, I probably deserved that.
Don't hit horses.
That was my fault. It was New Year's Eve. I know you have horses. It was a cop's horse. It was way out of line. I deserved the smacking he gave me. But no, the point you're making is about the privilege and what we have and doing something with it. And that's what you're doing. Like, you've done it all. Look at your career. Look at who you are. You're now telling the leaders, all of which look up to you. Some of the most important, influential people in the world look up to you. And now you're telling them, you got to actually live the change, be the change, have skin in the game. It's not just something you can say. You have to do it. And you're calling them out when they don't, it would seem.
Well, that's exactly right. And the risk to me is that actually everything that I built could be taken away. And you know what?
Worth it.
Fuck it. Fuck it. It's totally worth it. I mean, look, we're old enough to remember the 80s and the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah.
And I wrote about this in the introduction. Remember those stickers from ACT UP. Silence equals death.
Yeah.
Because this is the thing, Pete, and I try to draw the through line here from anti-Black racism to anti-Semitism to Islamophobia to anti-immigration policies to the lack of empathy that so marks our debate.
Anti-women,
patriarchy, white supremacy. The consequences of this are that babies are dying. Okay, and I say this dramatically. In Buddhism, I'm a student of Buddhism. There's this moment where the teacher kind of whacks you upside the head to say, "Wake up! Babies are dying." And if that's not enough for us to stand up, I don't know what else we can do. Babies, 6-year-old Palestinian American kid gets stabbed to death because the dialogue in this country lacks civility, lacks nuance, lacks intelligence.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, a 6-year-old Palestinian kid gets stabbed to death.
That shouldn't get there, because the more common every day, I hate the word, but it's so perfect, microaggressions that people feel. It's all the time. We can all do better to try to understand. And that's what this whole movement of DEI has always been. And I know you talk a lot about that. It gets very convoluted. But the point is, we can learn so much about each other so that we don't commit these aggressions against people that you wouldn't even realize if you didn't, by the way, spend some time with them, which isn't always the easiest thing to do, to find people who aren't like you. So I just want to know a little bit more about what you tell people. We're going to get specifically into the book and how you get there, about those kinds of daily aggressions that we commit and might not even know it before we get to the violence.
Well, I'll bring you back to the question you asked before about the ability to do this kind of consciousness raising work, or the importance of doing this consciousness raising work.
Yeah.
Among the many, many forms of toxic leadership or toxic uses of power are when someone hasn't actually done their internal work enough. The great Buddhist teacher Rhonda McGee writes about this in The Inner Work of Racial Justice. Brilliant book.
Mm.
When we haven't done our inner work, the efforts at best become performative and at worst become toxic.
Right.
And so, yeah, our mutual friend Dan Harris said, in writing an endorsement for the book, he said, "It's not enough that Jerry calls us to be our better person. Now he wants us to heal the world." Yes.
Yeah.
You nearly made me cry when you brought me back to holding Emma as a little baby. Okay. The name Emma means she who will heal the world.
Mm.
What the hell did I do when her mom and I named her Emma? What did I do? And so
you put a real burden on that girl.
no.
No lower. I named my daughter Ava. It means you don't really have to do anything.
It's all right, Emma. You're off the hook. You've done enough.
Well, the question of enough. How about that? I mean, you're asking me to do something I've never even thought to do. And I've just begun to understand trauma and the, kind of generational trauma. I used to
Right.
think it was something that only people, like Black folks and Jewish people suffered from. And you're asking us to do more work now to understand to whom we have belonged. And I think this might be the toughest case for you to sell. I'm doing it because I have so much respect for you, but I'm not sure I fully understand how it's going to affect me in the vessel that I'm in the past that I've had. And I know you're now going to disabuse me of that and teach me something. And reading your book is already, but I'm acting like I haven't.
One of the most important tenets of Buddhism is the notion of compassion. And the kissing cousin to compassion is empathy. Mm. And we cannot generate true empathy until we are willing to go back to the back of the cave and look and understand the roots of who we are and how we are. And so the danger is to create a false equivalency between, say, what happened to the Irish in the diaspora, and the effects of colonization on Ireland, and say the effects of colonization by European powers throughout the world. There is a danger of false equivalency.
Sure.
And thus lessening the experience of others. But there's an equally strong danger when we look at what's going on the southern border of the United States. And for the entirety of my life, we have had a screwed up immigration policy. But the truth is, we've had a screwed up immigration policy for as long as we've had these United States. Okay. When we look at what's going on the southern border of the United States, and we lose sight of the fact that most of the people who hold power in the United States are descendants of immigrants who left economic or political persecution or religious persecution to come to the United States. And we look at a mother from Venezuela making that horrendous trip through Central America only to be faced by razor wire in the Rio Grande. When we forget, we dehumanize. And so part of doing this work is to blow past the bullshit myths. Oh, why did my ancestors make it? And why can't they?
Well, there was a ladder and a pathway, and there was a different structure, number one. And number two, nothing.
And there was an economic engine. There was a
Yeah,
capitalistic economic engine that said, bring us your poor so that they could work for nothing.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, there was, and still is in many ways. But what you just said is so. I've said this to so many men, especially because I think it triggers them to maybe think, which is all these people. You talked about the mother trying to come through with her kid. Like, I like to appeal to a man's sense of his own masculinity in this case by saying, you've never done anything as brave as leave your country and home and maybe your family to try to make a little money in America. You've never done that. But what you're saying is maybe you'd appeal to that person, but maybe your grandparent did. Maybe your grandfather did. So maybe stop being a dick to these people who are doing something braver than you have ever done in your life. But you know who did do it? Your grandfather. And I'm sure they'll say, well, he did it the right way. And then you lose maybe the credit, but it's bullshit.
But let's talk about that. In the case of my grandparents, and as you know from reading the book, one set came from Ireland, another set came from Italy, from southern Italy. It wasn't until 1923 that restrictive immigration policy was put in place literally to support white supremacy. The decision of who was white and who wasn't went all the way to the Supreme Court when a man of Indian descent asserted that he was Aryan. And guess what? He was. And therefore white. And the Supreme Court ruled in its stupidity, it's obvious you're not white. Look at your skin color. Right? And that cemented much of what we consider the right way to immigrate to the United States or emigrate to the United States.
So important to think of it that way. And you're trying to convince us to all commit to doing that kind of individual journey so that we can find out where we fit in, where we belong. Tell us what you're asking folks to do to trace back and how it creates this sense of belonging that we also desperate want anyway.
Well, to link this work to the first work that we were talking about in my first book, Reboot.
Yeah.
The first thing I want people to do is grow up. See, to be a fully actualized human means to accept and acknowledge that which has happened before. And to understand and integrate that into who you want to be now and in the future.
Yeah.
And that's hard work. I get it. I understand. But you know what? You can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can do a lot of hard things. That's not so bad. Now, specifically with regard to the reunion work, what I'm asking people to do is to re-member that which has come before, to remember those in our history. There's a woman who wrote in the afterward, she contributed one of the 3 essays in the afterward to Reunion. And she asked a searing question because she talked about how her ancestors who came from Switzerland really preserved the family tree in the family Bible. Mm-hmm. And she asked the question, what happened to the queer ancestors? Because guess what? They were there. Right? What happened to the trans ancestors?
Yeah.
What happened? Because we don't talk about them.
Right.
right? To quote Disney's Encanto, we don't talk about Bruno. We don't talk about the mentally ill. We don't talk about those people. And so what I'm asking is to remember all of our ancestors. You know, the great-great-grandmother who was raped by her enslaver. She's lost to time. To bring them all back in, to welcome them back in, to know for sure to whom you belong.
Mm.
So that from that place, you use your power and privilege to set policies that are fundamentally based in empathy.
Fundamentally based in empathy. I feel like when we learn important things from someone like you, and I remember the first time I heard the quote, "How have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want," which can be applied not only to the paradigms of privilege and economic situations and social justice, but to your marriage, to your relationship with your kids, to your relationship, probably most importantly, with yourself. That's where I took it. How have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want, to how much shit I order or my kids do from Amazon, to what I'm not doing to role model to them? How have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want? When I learned something so profound, a quote like that it just hit you. I remember when I heard Dan Harris and you talking about it, I just stopped what I was doing. I remember I was trying to focus on your words when listening to a podcast, and that's hard to do if you're doing something else. So I was just sitting there listening, and I realized I actually, if I want to be what you're saying I should do, I have to say that every day in my meditation.
Amen,
I have
brother.
to do that every day. How have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want? I have to do it every morning, Jerry. You can't just think that, oh, that's profound, I'm going to try to do that and then leave it. Talk to me about
this is my journal.
Yes.
This is what I write about every morning. This is what I've been writing about since I was 13 years old. And, you know, the truth is, yeah, there we go. The truth is that question was formulated from the work I did with Dr. Sayers, my first psychoanalyst, who would hold my feet to the fire and say, yeah, buddy boy, but what about you? What about you, dude? No, she never used the word dude. She was a nice Jewish lady from Brooklyn. What she would say to me.
Right. That's what you heard. Yeah.
Yeah. What she would say to me is, you're incorrigible. You keep wanting to blame other people for the conditions of your life. And yes, you're not entirely responsible for things. Your parents did things that were fucked up. Yes, that's true. But how have you been an accomplice? What are you doing to make a difference?
What am I saying that needs to be? What am I not saying that needs to be said? What am I saying that's not being heard? I think about that one a lot because I'm saying it. Why aren't you hearing? Well, maybe I should say it differently or in a different place. Try threads. What's being said that I'm not hearing, I think might be the most important thing for me, someone who talks too much and for a living, to be listening to all these voices of which I don't have, which I am not.
That's right. And for listening to the ways people speak that may not be similar to the way you and I speak. We're both talkers. We both are facile with words. Not everyone communicates with words. Can you listen with your heart? Can you listen with empathy? Can you listen in a way that the other person not only feels that they're heard, but for heaven's sake, that they belong?
I feel like I want to talk with you about the book primarily because it's a book interview and there's so much good in there. But I also feel like I just want to ask you about when you try to teach people these ideas, and the people you're teaching, because you're Jerry Colonna, are the highest performers in the world. They got all the medals, all the money, maybe all the opportunity. They've taken advantage. They've done very well. And then they come to you and then you tell them this woke bullshit. Jerry Wokona. I mean, thanks, Jerry. I appreciate your, you caring about diversity. We value diversity, but I'm not going to trace my past. I'm not going to, I'm not complicit. I didn't do anything. I just opened a door for a trans Black woman, gave her a job. Like how does what you're saying register, much less any of the rest of your executive leadership, with the most egotistical people in the world? And what am I getting wrong with this question?
You're not getting anything wrong with the question. First of all, that is a challenge. But as I have always done, okay, because whether it's talking about these issues or, for heaven's sake, reading people poetry, which I will do, okay, the issue really boils down to this. Would you like to alleviate your suffering or not? Would you like to live your life in a way where when you wake up in the morning, you don't feel like crap?
Mm.
Because all of those powerful people that you reference, they're all suffering. The thing that frustrates me and drives me
Doesn't look
crazy.
like it, according to their Instagram feeds. Looks like they're doing fucking amazing. They're all doing.
Sure. So go talk to your daughters. Ask them about their friends on Instagram. Ask them what it feels like when everybody is presenting a self, when everybody's in this space of presenting, life as if they're all supposed to be influencers. The thing that frustrates me about people who live outside of what they would call the corporate world is that they look at people inside the corporate world and they presume they don't suffer. And because the presentation of self is in such a way that, hey, I've got it all figured out, the fact of the matter is that's all bullshit. They all suffer. So you know what my job is, Pete? My job, I'm a first responder to suffering. That's it. And if I can alleviate the suffering of someone who is the CEO of a 5,000 person company and get them to stop doing the shit that they do, then I've helped to alleviate the suffering of 5,000 employees.
Yes. That's the work I believe that you're doing.
If I could work with a politician to get them to sit still, stop playing power games, and to do the job that they were asked to do in the first place, to govern and set policies that benefit people, not power, by forcing them to confront their own demons, then I've done a mitzvah. I've done a good deed.
Yeah, understatement. But the problem, and this is where I really kind of feel like is the biggest struggle in America, maybe the world, and with the challenge that you have taken up, is a lot of the people who you want to ask these questions, who you want us to do this work, now feel they are the victims. If you look at the polling, if you look at the social science, it is white folks, white men, but especially white folks, including some high earners, that think they are the victims, and they're being led by a man who's the biggest victim in the world. And if a frighteningly large percentage of American white people believe they are more discriminated against than Black folks or any other marginalized group, how do we convince them that to do the work that you're asking us to do if they think they're currently being victimized? Because as you're hearing so many Republicans now say, the Catholics, you're making the Catholics. Now the Catholics, Jerry, our people are being victimized. I would say they've been victimized by their church for generations, but don't get me started. Jerry, how do you convince the white folks who think we are discriminated against to do this work? Do you come up against these folks?
Of course I do. I mean, I come up against, I live in the same world that you do, Pete. Okay, I agree with you completely.
That was just a provocative setup.
Right, but I will come back to what I told my daughter upon the death of Michael Brown. And I will pull forth two teachings. Parker Palmer's Living in the Tragic Gap. Yeah, what you just said is true. So what do? Stop trying? The second teaching I'll bring forth is an epigram chapter 7, a reunion. It comes from the Talmud. And in it, Rabbi Tarfon says, "It is not up to you to complete the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect the work." Yeah, we live in a world where malefactors and malicious, mendacious people take advantage of the ways in which we all can narcissistically see ourselves as victims, manipulate that, weaponize that to drive wedges between people who would be natural allies. Right now, it's happening with Jews in America. Right? Somehow DEI efforts have morphed into anti-Semitism. Okay, I'm old enough to remember when people would question whether Jews should be allowed into the Ivy League. Okay? My university system, CUNY, was started in part to provide education, free education, to the children and grandchildren of immigrants. I understand these roots. So I know what's going on. When I wrote this book, I didn't anticipate. I knew that the world was divided and that the wages of separation resulted in the deaths of children. I understood that. I did not anticipate that it would actually get worse. And it has gotten worse.
Yes. Yes.
But I'll be damned if I give up trying.
Same. But there isn't really, is there? You said, I feel like twice, failure. Is it failure? Like you've made a profound impact on more people than most people. And I feel like I've in the same category throughout my career. I will never stop wanting to do this work and be more enlightened and be better at it. And that's why I'm talking to you and learning from you. But at the same time, and I feel like there's been so much failure, but at the same time, we succeeded with the school board. We won. We still are winning. We succeeded with voting rights and then we lost them. We succeeded with reproductive rights and then maybe we lost them. But isn't it always the work that you're always doing it? So are you ever failing if you're being as influential as you are? I mean, isn't it enough, Jerry?
I think you're asking two questions. The first is it a failure? And the answer, of course, is no. Because we have to define what success is. Success is living, again, I'll reference to Buddhism.
Sure.
The Four Noble Truths ends in the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is a guidance for how to live one's life. And right livelihood, right intention, right speech. And so trying whether or not you, quote unquote, succeed in changing what it is you set out to change, trying despite that is right livelihood. I will go to my grave doing that.
Yes.
And, I invoke my ancestors and I ask people to invoke their ancestors because I want to draw out our responsibilities to our descendants.
Right.
I do not want my descendants, be they my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren someday, I do not want them to say, so there was this guy, he had power, and he didn't try. My moral responsibility is to try every single day. It's to ask the complicity question. It's to lean into the tough spots. It's to lean into hard conversations. It's to be challenged so that I can continue the process of growing up, being the man that I was supposed to be when breath came into this meat sack and said, Mazel tov, you are here.
Yeah, well, you've done that and more, including with your kids. The second question, was it enough? At the end of the day, did I do enough? At the end of the week, did I do enough? At the end of my career, my life, did I do enough? I still see pain and suffering. I still feel marginalized people. I still feel like I could have done this or that. And that sometimes will leave people feeling like it's not enough, or a sense of emptiness or loneliness, or being not worthy of the life and the breath that you just mentioned.
Okay, so let's go back to the sense of worthiness for a moment.
Right.
One of the challenges that makes it difficult for us to see enough as the balm that it can be is that we think that we must accumulate toys in order to feel enough, or we think that we must accumulate power or money. And in the same vein, if we endeavor to do good work in the world, John Lewis's Good Trouble,
Yeah.
if we endeavor to do that and we attach our sense of worthiness to the pursuit of good trouble, we're in trouble. Okay. What keeps me going, what is my source of resilience, is to know that I am enough just as I am, and I will try more.
Love that.
The two are not contradictory thoughts. They actually support each other. Because I am enough as I am responsible for doing more.
Yes. Yes, indeed. I feel that. Finally, reunion, leadership, and the longing to belong. I haven't gotten nearly as into the book with you in this conversation as I want to. I hope everybody gets it, because it just, every page just, I go back and read things again to try to understand how it manifests in me and how I should think about it. But the word leadership, I think sometimes it could mislead the reader or the potential buyer, because I'm not a leader, someone might say. And I thought about it. And the truth is, if you have a child, you're a leader. They're watching you. You're definitely leading. If you are just walking alone, you could be leading by your behavior. We've all seen these videos go viral of bad behavior. That's not leadership. So when you talk about leadership and the longing to belong, who are you talking to if they're not one of the people that you're an executive coach of?
So do you recall when your daughter stood up for what was right?
Yeah, it's permanent and emblazoned into my brain and my soul.
So God bless her soul. She was a leader.
Right.
Okay. The way to understand leadership, the way I'm defining it now, and it is a broadened definition, because we associate leaders with those who might hold power in political or business organizations and that kind of thing. But the fact is, we all have an opportunity to lead. When my daughter challenges me to not just be an ally, she is leading her father.
Right.
Okay, that is the opportunity. There are small steps that you can take every single day when you are in touch with that inner sense of knowing that we all have, that inner sense of morality that too often we ignore. We are leading. When we act from empathy in a world that lacks empathy, right? The war on wokeness is really a war on empathy.
Yes, and curiosity.
Yeah. I mean, it's dressed up to serve political or personal wounds ends. But the truth of the matter is how dare you care about your colleague? Right? When you stand up for your colleagues, for your neighbor, you're leading. That's what leadership is. And to close out the thought on the subtitle, we all are motivated by a desire to belong. Behind it all is the wish to know conclusively, irrefutably, that I have a right to exist in this incarnation, in this time, on this planet. What if we built a world filled with policies and political governance that took that as its centerpiece?
But just to be clear, that's not too lofty of an idea. What if we built a world? Because if I hear that, it might be just in my office or on my street or in my family. Like my world is the world that I have an impact on. I think it sounds utopian when people might hear it the way you said. What if we built a world? Certainly it'd be amazing to create new systems and structures that create a more opportunity for everybody. But the truth is, you can create a world. We've created a world here with this podcast, an amazing community, and people invest in it. You can impact the world that you exist in, I feel like. And I feel like that's what I'm hearing when I read the book. I'm reading the book.
You know, I think we had a similar college experience. We were talking about radicalization, and I remember some of my. I had one professor in college who was probably wanted by the FBI, but but I remember him saying to us all the time, "Think global, act local."
Yeah.
Right? They are not in opposition. Be aware of the malicious forces at work that benefit from war. And go stand in your town square and stand in solidarity with people who feel on either side of that war.
Peter Coyote, who's a mentor of mine and a Buddhist priest, said, it's not only something, to stand up, is to go and to say something, but sometimes just comfort. Like not all of us want to put our as articulate or we're too scared. You can bring someone food. You can invite someone over. You can make that marginalized person or family member or work feel belonging by invite. Like you don't have to stand up to the man all the time. You can do something that creates safety, security, and as your friend, not mine, Sharon Salzberg, talks about loving kindness. You can do that for people all the time, and it without having some adversarial situation or experience, right? Like you can do that. Peter Coyote insisted I do that. He's like, who's taking care of that family? I was like, nobody.
Right. Right now there's this backlash, this white supremacist power positioning going on around immigrants to the United States. And so we have, families being bussed. Now they're being bussed into New Jersey because they can't get into New York. And somehow this is an attack against the elitists in New York. It's mind-boggling. Give them food. Give them water.
Yeah.
Give them shelter. Give them blankets.
Yep.
Yes. And pressure the politicians to solve the problem. We've got a crisis in Ecuador going on right now as we talk.
Yep.
That is only going to lead to more migration pressures. What are we, as the most powerful country in the world, doing to support a democratic government in Ecuador against the forces of evil that are trying to deny human rights? We know that this is what works. We did this after World War II.
And if you thought the history of marginalized people having to migrate, having to leave it, if you thought that was something, if you think what's going on right now in Ecuador is something, wait till, and some people will say the planet just keeps changing to a point where you can't farm. There's no water. I mean, a lot of people already believe that many of these people can be considered climate refugees. I believe that's a classification for some of them. So that's only going to continue to happen. We got to create, we can't just close the door. They're humans.
Climate justice is human justice.
Yes.
Human justice. If we do not work look at those two biggest problems facing the species together in their interlocked way, we will fail. And to bring it back to where we started, babies will die.
Yeah. Well, you've written a book that are directions as to what we can all do. And so I say, Mazel Tov, congratulations. It is another amazing edition from you, your second book, but you've been doing this work a long time. And you're role modeling the exact kind of leadership to the leaders and to everybody that you're speaking to that we need. We're very grateful. I'm very grateful to have gotten to meet you and talk to you. Thank you so much. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Anytime. And Pete, thank you for using your voice the way you do. The work you do matters. Don't forget that.
Thank you. It means a lot to me that you would say that. I'm going to hit stop and then I'll cry.